What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Roundtable. We have a special event tonight. We have a live debate, and we're going to get straight to it. So we have Pastor John and we have Mike joining us here this evening, and they are going to be debating the existence of Jesus Christ, and if he did exist, was he divine? Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for coming to the Atheist Roundtable platform and channel. Mike, anything that you want to add before we get down to business?
Well, yeah, actually, if anybody didn't get a chance this morning, I was on the Daily Atheists channel this morning. We talked about Star Trek and stuff I'm not as familiar with, but it was interesting. We talked about some aspects of religion, how Star Trek kind of broke the mold in regards to multiculturalism and everything in that regard. But it's a really interesting conversation, so I would check it out on the Daily Atheist page. And other than that, I'm just super excited for the debate, and I can tell that my camera's having issues, so I'm glad that we get to turn this over to other people and have them worry about that for a change.
Yep, and it looks like StreamYard as a whole is kind of slowing us down right now. So as soon as we jump off here, we'll address that. But last, our moderator for tonight, Dr. Spartan Theology, thanks for joining us here at the round table for the live debate. And the floor is yours and the contestants.
Cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate you bringing me on to mod this debate. We've been talking about it in the Discord for a little bit, so I'm pretty excited. Should be pretty good. I guess we'll add in Pastor John and Mike, who are going to be our debaters. Yeah, cool. Well, if you guys just want to introduce yourselves real quick, and then we'll get into the debate, just so everybody knows like which side of the debate you're taking, and just very brief who you are and what you're going to be debating. So we'll start with Pastor John. We'll start with the Christian.
Yeah. So that's a great introduction. I'm the Christian. So I believe when I say the word Christian, I simply believe that I am a follower of Jesus. That's what Christian means. So I try to follow Jesus in words, actions, deeds, and attitudes. I'm a youth pastor at a church in Naples, Florida. Been here for about 3 years. I've been a youth pastor for coming up on 8 years. I was in Georgia prior to this. I was raised around Christianity. I was raised in a Christian home, though I myself was a problem child, you could say. I was kicked out of a bunch of schools, and I have a crazy Christian testimony. But ultimately, I'm excited to be here tonight. I think Mike's a great guy. I think we're going to have a great conversation. And it's always great for me to hang out with the Atheist Roundtable here, because they're a bunch of crazy guys. I was telling them before we actually went live that who needs enemies when I have friends like you guys? So that's my intro.
Yeah, nice. So, Mike, if you could let everybody know who you are.
Hey guys, my name is Mike. I'm the atheist. I've been an atheist for like 5 years. You can actually find me on TikTok. I'm pretty famous on TikTok. I'm always posting videos up there. Just my name, Mike Burgundy. You can find me there. So yeah, I've been an atheist for 5 years. I was raised as a Christian Catholic. I wasn't very religious, but my parents were pretty liberal. But I decided at about 5 years ago that there was no valid reason for me to continue my belief in a God, right? So that's my position. I don't I'm not convinced that any God exists, and of course, a Jesus exists, or any kind of person like Jesus. Yeah, so that's basically it. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, cool. I appreciate that. So yeah, I guess we'll lay out the format a little bit. We're trying to keep this to around an hour long. So with that in mind, we're doing about 10-minute openings each. And then after that, with just kind of a free form. And since the title of the debate, is Did Jesus Exist and Was He Divine? We're going to try and at least make sure we get at least 20 to 30 minutes at the end on that topic. So with that, I guess since you're going to be doing the first opening, John, I'm assuming since you're taking the affirmative, then we'll throw it over to you. And you're muted.
Oh, all right, there we go. Hear me now? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen with the audience. And this is where I'm going to be able to get into my points. So let's open this up here. Oh, it is not working for me right now. Pasta, it worked every single time prior to this
You're
moment.
about to say it worked literally 1
Every
minute ago. So
single time prior to this moment. So Pasta, if you have that for me, I would appreciate you putting it up. And if you don't have it, I'm just going to read it, and you guys are just going to have to look and listen to me.
I was going to say, if you can, John, visual representation might have to be a last short thing, sacrifice.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we'll just for the sake of the time and for the viewer's sake, if we can't get Pasta to get it up there, just read it off there, because the content's what matters.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, he's got it.
Looks like we got it now anyway.
There it is. Okay. Pasta, can you scroll up for me, sir? Like I said, I was going to share my screen, but I'm going to have to, you need to, back up all the way to the front. Yeah, here we go. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to begin here. And Pasta, whenever you see me read the ending of it, please just go to the next slide then. All right. So did Jesus exist? My answer is absolutely, as you already saw on the slide that popped up. Now, why do I believe that he exists? What do scholars and historians look for to help validate that there is a historical Jesus, or validate their research? Well, let's look at a few options. The criteria of historical authenticity. Number one, you can look at early attestation. The historicity of an event is more plausible if it is recorded early on. Multiple attestation. An event is more plausible if it is recorded by multiple independent sources, as you see highlighted in red. Dissimilarity. An event is more plausible if it is dissimilar to prior beliefs of those claiming its occurrence. How about embarrassment? An event is more plausible if it refers to problematic claims within the occurrence, such as embarrassing details. And then lastly, enemy attestation. An event is more plausible if it is recorded by a hostile source. So how about we look at multiple independent hostile attestations? So not only are they independent of each other, there's multiple of them, and they're all hostile accounts from non-biblical pagan sources. So let's look at Thales here. He's the earliest known secular writer, dated around 52 AD, only 20 years after Jesus' death. He was a Roman historian. He was quoted by Sextus Julianus Africanus in around 221 AD on the atmosphere surrounding the crucifixion. Let's look at it. Next slide before me. And here's his quote: "On the whole world there pressed a most fearful darkness." Now this is Julius Africanus talking, let me clarify. "And the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down. This darkness Thales in the third book of his history calls, as appears to me without reason, an eclipse of the sun." Julius Africanus, Chronography 18:1. So let's look at this next part. In Mark 15:33, the Bible says, "When the 6th hour came, darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour. All right. Now, what we see with Thales' statement is he is giving natural explanation to the darkness that took place in the middle of the day by saying it's an eclipse of the sun. All right. Question: you deny the historical existence of Jesus, Mike. Do you also deny the existence of Greek philosophers such as Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, and Pythagoras? So that's a question you can write down and you can answer a little later. Let's look at Marabar Serapion. Dated in 70 AD, Marabar was a Syrian philosopher, wrote a letter to his son, and in the letter compared the persecution of Jesus to that of the lives of Socrates and Pythagoras. Those manuscripts are held at the British Library. Here's a picture of the manuscript, and here's the quote. "What benefit did the Athenians obtain by putting Socrates to death? Famine and plague came upon them as judgment for their crime, or the people of Samos for burning Pythagoras. In one moment their country was covered with sand, or the Jews by murdering their wise king. After that, their kingdom was abolished. God rightly avenged these men. The wise king lived on in the teachings he enacted. Notice the highlights in red. Now let's go to the scriptures. What do they have to say about this to corroborate? Mark 15:2, Pilate questioned him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "It is as you say." John 19:19 through 22, Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It was written, "Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews." Therefore, many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that he said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" And Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Let's go to the next one. And I hope you allow me some more time on these slides that I have to, since I have to talk a little more. Does that make sense, Spartan? All right, so let's look at this quote where it says, "After that, their kingdom was abolished." This same quote by Bar Serapion. Well, let's look at the history that corroborates this. After that, their kingdom was abolished. Next slide for me. 1, Jerusalem was the Jewish capital of Israel. 2, the Romans sieged Jerusalem in 70 CE. They utterly destroyed the city along with the Jewish temple. This happened just 40 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, or the wise king, who Bar Serapion clearly mentions, this wise king. Now, let's look at another source, Cornelius Tacitus, dated between 56 AD and 120 AD. Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus is known for his analysis and examination of historical documents and is one of the most trusted ancient historians. His manuscripts can be found at the Laurentian Library in Florence, Italy. Here's a picture of the manuscript. Here's what it says. "Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. Christus," and he's talking about the Roman fire, by the way, great Roman fire. "Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of the procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular." Now, in the beginning of Jesus' ministry, let's look at some of these things that corroborate with this Tacitus report. "Now, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea." And I'm going to move on down to the trial of Judas, where it says, "Pilate released Barabbas for them, and after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified." Next slide for me. Now, we would not have even known Pilate existed except for historical sources such as the Gospels, Josephus, and a Jewish philosopher named Philo. That is until 1961, when we found physical archaeological evidence known as the Pilate Stone. And it reads, "To the divine Augusta Tiberium, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, has dedicated," corroborating with the biblical account. Next slide for me. Now, let's look at some quotes from historians that are modern and New Testament scholars. Bart Ehrman, one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. Let's look at John Dominic Crossan. That he was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. Gerd Ludman, Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is an indisputable fact. Now, you may think I'm quoting New Testament scholars that are Christians or theists, but let's actually look at the fact of the matter. They're not. Every single one of these men are either agnostic or atheist scholars and historians, so there's no bias. Let's go to the next one. The final one I want to look at is a Jewish source, Flavius Josephus, dated between 37 AD and 101 AD. He's a Jewish historian born just 4 years after Jesus' crucifixion under the rule of Roman Emperor Vespasian. He was allowed to write a history of the Jews, and he is one of the most historically attested Palestinian Jews of the first century. And let's see what he has to say about Jesus. Here's the quote. Now, there was about this time Jesus. Now, I am going to not read these lines in black, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Now, there was about a time Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to a cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him. And the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day. All right. Go to the next one. Now, admittedly, the majority of scholars and historians believe this manuscript to include Christian interpolation, but only partially, not entirely. That's important. The majority is believed legitimate, but certain phrases, like you saw in black, would have most likely been inserted by a Christian scribe that believed these statements. But again, partially, not entirely. How do we know the entire testimonium is not flawed by Christian interpolation? Here's how. Next one. Josephus mentions Jesus a second time, this time referring to James as the brother of Jesus. This second mention is undisputed among the vast majority of New Testament scholars and historians. And here's the quote in Josephus' Antiquities, Book 20, Chapter 9. Look at it for yourself. Festus was now dead. Albinus was upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James. Now let's look at in Matthew 13:55. Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Next. So biblical corroboration. Now, let's review all of this, and I'm done. Let's review the historical and scholarly, virtually uncontested facts regarding Jesus as a historical figure. First and foremost, he existed. Second, he lived most of his life in Judea. He taught in parables and did something to astonish crowds. He was a wise man, influential man who died for his beliefs. He was crucified under the orders of Pontius Pilate. He believed he had special relationship with God. The Jewish leadership was responsible for his death, and his followers believed and were persecuted for their faith. Uncontested facts. These are only a few examples of making an undeniable case for the historicity of the man, Jesus Christ. There are many more examples. Pop that next one up. There are many more examples that we could actually go into, but for the sake of time, we will not. Next slide. Now, Mike says, I do not believe without evidence. There's no evidence that Jesus from the Bible existed. Mike and so many others seem to think there's not a single shred of evidence, so they refuse to believe that Jesus from the Bible existed, as you see in his statement right there in the picture. But here's the fact of it. Next slide. I just showed you the evidence. Final question. Do you believe it now?
All right, nice. So we were right at like 10 minutes and 45 seconds. So I was like, actually perfect. Good job.
Okay, good deal.
Yeah, nice. So with that, we'll throw it over to Mike for his opening. And if you don't take 10 minutes, or you do take 10 minutes or a little bit more or whatever, it's definitely flexible. So with that, we'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to take 10 minutes. I'm going to be short and sweet. The evidence that Jesus existed. So my position, like I said before, is that I'm not convinced that a Jesus figure existed, especially from the Bible. So first, we need to know what evidence is, right? I think we need to follow evidence, right? We need to follow the standards of evidence. So what exactly is evidence? You need to know what that is first before you can claim what you have is evidence. Evidence is a body of facts that are verifiable. It's verifiable data which indicate a conclusion, right? So these facts should be verifiable, testable, repeatable, right? These facts should be investigated. They can be investigated and verified through experimentation, right? And these experiments should be able to be replicated throughout the entire world. In other words, anybody can repeat these experiments in order to verify that these facts are true. So that's what evidence is. Now, there's other reasons why there's other actually reasons to believe that Jesus probably did not exist. So a lot of people mention the letters of Paul, right? And most scholars agree that 7 out of 13 are actually not authentic. Rest of them are forgeries, right? 1 Corinthians 15 verses 1 through 8 says there's no mention of Jesus before being seen before he died. A lot of the scriptures, like as Paul mentions, everything that Paul mentions in the scriptures is just revelation. It's just his opinion. It's just his imagination, almost. Like, as far as we can tell, he calls it revelation from Jesus. There's no way to verify. Like, in other words, there's no way to verify that these revelations are true, that they actually happened. The Gospels come decades way after we hear any earthly Jesus story, any mention of Jesus existing on earth, right? In Mark 4:11 to 12, it says the whole gospel is a parable. That's basically what it says. He mentions that he's speaking in parables. In Acts, as John just actually said, but there's really a lot of people believe, a lot of scholars believe that originally there was no mention of Jesus in these texts. In the original text, there was no mention of Jesus at all. The stories in the Bible are vague. They're few, and they're all debatable. There's no way. The common theme I'm trying to get to is that there's no way to verify any of these stories that happen in the Bible. There's no way to verify there's no way to investigate these stories, right? I agree there are stories in the Bible that could mention Jesus, right? But are they actually verifiable? No, they're not. I'm not, and I'm going to mention these mythical gods, right? There's commonalities. This is just another reason to believe that Jesus probably did not exist. But I'm not a mythicist. However, it's just a reason to believe that there may not be Jesus. There's many myths at the time which were allegories based on celestial beings, way before Christianity, right? Romulus, Osiris is an Egyptian god, Zalmoxis, the Grecian god. They were all savior gods. They were all the son of God, right? They all obtained victory over death. All of them have stories of them being on earth, and they all have this other thing in common. None of them existed. And then lastly, just another reason to believe. Again, I'm not saying that Jesus did not exist. However, I'm just convinced that there's no evidence to say he did exist. So a smart God, right? If we're claiming that this all-powerful magical God is all-knowing, right? Would he really make a book that requires that the stories in the book which are not verifiable? Why would he make a book that contains stories in there which are not verifiable, which require extraordinary amounts of evidence, right? Why wouldn't he make these stories so utterly convincing without a doubt to anybody, right? And if you say it's a test, right, you need to test our faith. Well, what evidence do you have of that test? And then also, that really wouldn't be a loving God. Why would a loving God give us these brains which we can use to think rationally about the world, and then expect us to believe in these extraordinary claims without any evidence, right? And then send us to hell for it? That's not a test. That's a twisted, sick game, right? That your God is playing. And I just don't. Those are just reasons to not believe he existed. But again, my last words is that my position is held that there's no compelling evidence. There's no compelling reason to believe in Jesus existed. That's it.
Okay, nice. Thank you for that. So, so with that, I guess we're just gonna go into sort of a free form thing. I'm assuming we'll make sure within like the first 10 minutes that you each get to like say what you think about what the other person said, but it'll be pretty free form, and then so just back and forth from there. So I'll try and step in as little as possible and let you guys go from here.
All right. Well, I took my opening statement. So, Mike, how about you go ahead and start, and you can say why you think why you think my opening statement is unconvincing based off of the historical evidence that I gave. The only thing I'll say, and then I'll pass it over to you, is you said, what is evidence? It's verifiable and it indicates a conclusion. And then you talked about experimentation and things that we can repeatedly experiment on, right? That is not in any way, shape, or form how they verify evidential claims in history. It's not something. It's not that they take it to a lab and they want to repeat chemical tests to be able to tell whether or not someone existed. That you can't experiment on history. So my question would just be this: based off of what is your response based off the evidence that I gave, and why is that evidence unconclusive to you for a historical Jesus?
Okay, it's not sufficient evidence. Evidence, again, yes, we cannot. There actually are ways we can repeat history. We can take facts from history and repeat them. In other words, you said Aristotle. How do you know Aristotle existed, right? Well, we do have thousands of documents that he actually had a school. We know where he was born. We know where he died. We know he influenced thousands of people around his town, right? He had students. The students wrote about him. We have hundreds of sculptures of him. Okay, that's what evidence is, right? It's taking all those facts and putting them together, right? Almost like a puzzle piece, right? So yes, I agree. Aristotle, it's possible that he may not have existed, but then again, he didn't have he didn't have crazy, extraordinary claims going with his existence, right? As Jesus does. So you may be right. Aristotle may not have existed. We can't be absolutely certain. However, there is more sufficient evidence of Aristotle's existence versus Jesus' existence, right? You showed just a few documents, right? This is the reason you showed a few documents, a few testimonies, right? Testimonies aren't actually reliable ways to find evidence. They're just testimonies. Anybody could have written those things. They're just words in text. They're not. There's no way we can verify those things and put all those pieces together, right? There's just no way.
Okay, so
go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to respond to that in saying no sufficient evidence. Okay, so why is your opinion on these documents and these writings having to do with mentions of Jesus, such as Tacitus and all of these, Josephus and all of these different ones? Why does your opinion not? No, I'm not going to say it that way. I'll say it like this. Why does your opinion on the matter not match up with experts in the field? See, ultimately what you're giving is an opinion of, I don't see this as sufficient evidence, which what you're doing in that moment is you're making a philosophical statement to an extent. And to be honest, bad philosophy corrupts good history, right? That's a quote I like from Mike Winger. But you're giving an opinion that is not matched in any way by reputable historical scholars on the far right, on the far left. And I'm not saying that just by these scholars saying it's true and that these documents are reliable, that makes it true. No. I'm saying, what evidence are you bringing to the table to trump the evidence of those who are actually dedicating their lives to working in this field that call it plain and simple evidence?
Yeah, I'm not trying to bring evidence to the field. I'm just simply not convinced. We need to follow this. There's something called standards of evidence that we need to follow. All right. And you're right. Just because scholars say that, I don't care what they believe, what their religious beliefs are, just because the scholar says that these texts are authentic doesn't mean that Jesus actually existed. Like I said, there's no way to verify the things in the text, right, happened in reality. There's no way to do that.
But there is a way.
How do you do that?
I said it. I said it at the beginning. The criteria of historical authenticity.
How do you verify that the story actually occurred?
Okay, so in regards to early attestation, right? If something is recorded early on, it is going to have a more viable and plausible representation of being true. Would you agree with that? Or what would you say? Let me ask this question. What would you say or what was your question to me? And then I'll ask you this.
I don't know if I had a question.
Let me ask you this question. What is your standard of evidence for history? Because here's the thing. Would you apply any of these things to any other person, such as like Socrates and such as Pythagoras, mentioned in Mara Bar Sarabian,
Yes.
these great philosophers?
Yes.
And why would you do that?
Because, look, Aristotle, like I said, there's much more evidence of Aristotle than Jesus. There's more. A lot of people say George Washington. Well, we have George Washington's house he lived in. We have his tomb, his skeleton. We actually have his thousands of portraits of him, thousands of sculptures, and thousands of writings about him. Right? Not just 10 or 20 with like the Jesus figure, but I'm talking thousands. Hundreds of thousands of all these things put together. Then we can put them all together and complete the puzzle piece. Whereas Jesus, there's only 10, and the Josephus thing and the Flavius thing, these are documents that were written after Jesus supposedly lived, right? And also, there's no way to verify that, like you said, somebody could have just inserted their own after they wrote these things. Some Christian could have just inserted their own wording in there to make it seem like they were talking about Jesus when they really weren't, right? Are you getting that now?
No, I understand. I understand what you're saying. I completely disagree with it because some of the examples I gave, when you're pretty much, to an extent, you're discounting everything that historians look at as evidence. And you're saying, nope, that doesn't matter. Nope, that doesn't matter. So basically, within your view, you're saying that we shouldn't have historians to an extent, because everything that they look at as being evidence, everything that they look at as corroborating what has happened in the past, everything that I've mentioned, you're just saying, nope, that's not evidence. And that's it's foolishness. Your opinion does not meet scholarly academia. It can't. It's the mythicist position, like you even mentioned, and I'm going to pull this up really quick. Mike, well, let me see if this works first. I'm going to check and see if this actually works this time. Here we go. Okay, can you guys see my screen a little bit? Can everyone see my screen?
No,
I can't hear you.
No, I can't. We might though. There we go.
How about now? Okay, so for example, you mentioned some mythical gods, right? Well, do you realize the mythicist position? And I know you said you're not a mythicist, but
we're actually not seeing the screen, just so you know. But
you don't see the screen.
Now we are. Every time I say something, it comes up. So.
Oh, okay. All right. So you were referencing some mythical gods. Well, let's look at some of these really quick. And the mythicist position did not start until about the late 1700s. That is the first real reference that we have. The late 1700s of anyone saying that Jesus didn't exist. And I don't have the source on who said it, but so I'm not going to pause that, and you don't have to respond to that. But in the 1700s, you start getting this mythicist idea, and it's become really, really popular on the internet. People make memes about it. People do all of these things. But the fact of the matter is that the things they're saying, and even in like the movie Zeitgeist, right? This what they call a documentary that's actually propaganda. What you have is some of these examples like Jesus and Horus. Let's look at some of these really quick. So You mentioned Osiris, right? Well, this is kind of a variation of Osiris because this is Horus. Horus is the son of Osiris. So Horus was born of the virgin Isis on December 25th in a cave. This claim has no support from Egyptologists. He was actually born in a swamp in most things. The idea of him being a rising and dying god, he was buried for 3 days and was resurrected. You will not find anything like that in some of these sources. Where I put no evidence for this claim, I beg of you, I beg of you, Mike, I beg of everyone watching, take a screenshot, take a picture of these screens that I'm going through, and go and look for it yourself. Everything you see where I say no evidence for this claim, no evidence for this claim. And some of the things, here's the cool, here, you actually might like this. Let's look at like Krishna, for example. Number 10, he will return to earth on a white horse to kill an evil prince. I can actually concede in number 10 that this one is actually true. Krishna is depicted on a white horse. Here's the problem. Krishna was most likely borrowed from Christianity because our earliest sources that represent Krishna and some of these other ones that I was mentioning, our earliest sources, they actually post-date Jesus. They don't predate. We don't have manuscripts that predate Jesus that say that. So if borrowing happened, it was much more rational to see it as the other way around, rather than these mythic gods being representations of Jesus. So I'll let you respond.
Yeah, about to say, let's let Mike respond to
Yeah.
that. That was a pretty good point.
Yeah. So I'm trying to look up here Krishna. I believe it was an Indian god, and it pretty sure it was before Christianity, but whatever the case is. I mean, even if there is one thing even if there's one trait that these gods have in common with Jesus, the story of Jesus, still wouldn't that ring a little bell in your head and go, maybe this Jesus story isn't really completely original? Would that ring a bell to you, John? I mean,
all right, is my mic unmuted? Okay. So no, like I said, I can go back I can go right back into that slide and tell you exactly why these don't ring a bell. So for example, like Horus, when you look at this, Horus born of a virgin Isis, December 25th in a cave. We already looked at that one. There's correlation in these are all mythicist positions on the left. These are the claims, right? A star in the east announced his birth was visited by 3 wise men. No evidence for this claim. He had an earthly father named Seb, which translates to Joseph. Seb is actually a god. Osiris was actually the father of Horus. Seb is an earth god and has no linguistic connection to Joseph whatsoever in Egyptology. He was baptized by Nuke the Baptizer. No evidence for this claim. So when you see these things where I'm saying no evidence for this claim, and these are common mythicist positions that you can easily go to Google, you can look up and you can say, oh, was Jesus just based off mythic gods? You're going to find a lot of these. Here's the problem. Most of them are just outright lies. There's no evidence for this claim, no evidence for this claim, no evidence for this claim, no evidence for this claim. So in regards to, and I'll back out of that for now. In regards to saying that should ring a bell, one, no, because they're already outright lying, and outright lying is very, very weak testimony, right? Wouldn't you agree? Would you listen to a liar if you knew them to be lying about multiple positions? Because they're just trying to make a parallel. They're just trying to say, look how close Jesus is to these other mythic gods, right? Gosh, he was definitely borrowed, and that's just not the case. If anything, like I said, it's the other way around, because you look at Zoroaster, right? He's not an Indian god, Arab, within the Islamic faith, right? So looking at examples like him, you see these parallels, but then you go back to the source and you see where the manuscripts that we have, or the historical evidence we have about these mythic gods, they post-date Jesus. So if there was borrowing, yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I encourage you. If you want, I'll shoot you multiple examples.
No, there's tons of gods. There's Roman gods, there's Greek gods, Egyptian gods, Indian gods. Krishna existed 3,000 years before Christ. Okay, so they didn't exist after Christianity, right? I'm not saying that these gods were definitely. I'm not saying Christianity was definitely influenced by these gods, by these stories, but it just rings a bell. It's a reason to think that the Jesus story may not be completely original. However, let's move on from this. I was gonna say, let's get to this point. So, do you believe that everything in the Josephus text was completely true, right? Do you believe that Josephus, all these extra biblical texts are true? Could they have been messed with or messed with?
Here's the thing. When I say I look at the evidence, I am not a historian that I know of, and I could be wrong. Are you a historian?
I'm just saying.
Well, I'm just asking. Are you? I don't know anything about you. Okay.
No.
Are you any sort of scholar?
No.
Okay. So, in the same way that we look toward scientists and discoveries in order to find our evidence having to do with how we can make phone calls over long distances, and we look at these things, we trust the sources, we trust the evidence, and that's what we do with history. We say, okay, what are the experts saying about these sources? None of them are saying they're forgeries. None of them are saying that they're just made up. None of them are saying that there's Christian interpolation all throughout them. And it doesn't even make sense with, so Josephus, for example, I'll concede 100%. I even said it in the presentation. I will concede that Josephus in the first mention has Christian interpolation, 100%. That's what the majority of scholars and historians concede. So what I do is I look to the experts and I say, what are the experts saying? I'm not an expert, so I have to rely on the experts. So what are the experts saying? That doesn't mean that I'm saying absolutely what they're saying is true, but I have to rely on them for a valid source of historical evidence based off these criteria of authenticity, such as early attestation, enemy attestation, and that's the key with these sources that I gave. Josephus, where there was Christian interpolation, in the first one that I conceded. In the second mention, no experts say at all that it's not even in the conversation. They're not saying that this mention where Jesus talks about James, the brother of Christ, and then the Bible corroborates that that James was a brother of Christ, right? None of them are saying that has Christian interpolation. They're all saying this is an authentic Josephus writing, because he's not positing anything that is going to be outside of Josephus's character. Josephus was a Jew. He was not a Christian from everything that we know. So when you see this Christian interpolation, you can clearly see when it's represented. But when you're looking at other sources like Tacitus and Thales and Marabar Serapion, you are now looking at hostile attestation, especially Tacitus. Tacitus, he hated Christianity. He absolutely hated it. And everything that we have of Tacitus is seen by the experts, which we rely on as historical evidence. And basically your position is saying that it doesn't matter what the experts say. You're not an expert, but you're saying it doesn't matter what they say.
Okay. Well, look, if there is doubt to have, then why would you believe it as true? Why would you say, how can anybody, I don't care if you're a historian or anything, how could you possibly say that Jesus existed if there is doubt in the text that you're reading? Now, you talk about the Jesus, the brother of Jesus, right? Well, according to Christianity, all Christians are brothers of Jesus, right? When you're baptized, it means you're adopted by God. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's possible that the text was that, that's what the text meant. It's possible that's what the text meant. Would you agree? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely not. And I'll tell you
why not. Okay, so what's the evidence that Tacitus was actually talking about Jesus' biological brother?
All right, let's pull up that Pastor Mike, can you pull up specifically the Tacitus slide so we can look at it and everyone can see it? I know I'm putting you on the spot. He's in the background and he's my slave right now. I'm so sorry that it wasn't. Actually, wait a minute.
Yeah, and we do want to get to the second half of this debate about whether or not Jesus was divine. So let's
Okay,
kind of try and answer a couple more questions here, and then we'll move to that.
Okay, so go to Tacitus. Right there. Forward march. Okay. A little more, we're still in Marbar. Yep, there we go. Okay, so let's look at this. So where it says Christus, right, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius. Okay, so this is Tacitus. When we're talking about James, that's one mistake you made, is you're referring to Josephus. You're not referring to Tacitus. I was referring to Tacitus, and then you came back with a counter argument that's actually talking about Josephus. So looking at Tacitus, let's say this: Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. What is Tacitus doing? He is recording Roman history. And like I said, scholars accept his account of this Roman history. And then you go to the very next slide for me, Mike. And this will be my final thing. You see in Scripture, you see in Tacitus's thing, talking about Tiberius, recording Roman history, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, we see that in Scripture, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea. So Tacitus is not only talking about Christus, from whom the name of Christians get their origin, right? Who else could it be referring to? I've heard some crazy arguments, and I'm not saying you're saying this. I don't want anyone to think I think you're saying this. Heard some crazy arguments where they're like, "Oh, Christus was a name of someone back then," right? It's so silly. But Christus, from whom the Christians, that's how they got their origin, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar and Pontius Pilate. These are facts that Tacitus is giving us, and that experts are looking at. So when I say, do I 100% unequivocally know that Jesus existed if I'm just going off of an intellectual level? Well, no scholar says that. No scholar says we know, except when you look at certain things. Now they'll say it's an indisputable fact, like I gave from Gerd Ludman. And like I said, these are atheist people. They're not Christians. And so they're looking at the same evidence I am. They hold the opposing worldview that I do. And they're saying, look at these things, look at the evidence, look at what the consensus is among the vast majority of academic scholars, and let's come to a conclusion based off the evidence. You're looking at the evidence, saying it's not evidence, based off of absolutely no reason other than your own worldview being posited into what you're saying.
Yeah, so let's let Mike respond there, and then I think we want to try and get to the black parts you marked out. That was in Josephus. I think that would be a good point to hit. So let's let Mike answer this, and then we'll move to that.
Okay, so number one, I don't have a worldview. Okay, I just lack a belief in God, or lack of belief in Jesus' existence. Now, okay, like I said, evidence is a collection of verifiable facts. Okay. And like I said, like I'm going to keep saying, I mean, just because this text, right, you're looking at a text, you're looking at some words that people wrote down in a book, and you're claiming that it's evidence that Jesus existed. I mean, how can you possibly verify that these things actually occurred, right? It's very possible that whenever there's doubt in something, right? Like you said, you could doubt. You're doubting that there could be that Jesus could have existed. So if there's lots of doubt, right? Why would you even believe it? Why would you even believe it as true? They're just words in a book. That's what I'm trying to tell you. They're just words in text. They don't really mean anything outside of that.
Again, like I said, this is where we're getting in a circle. According to your opinion and no sources worth their metal.
According to the standards of evidence.
The standards of historical evidence are not what you're saying they are, though.
What is the standard of historical evidence then?
We went into it, the criteria of authenticity. The way historians literally do their job. They are historians and scholars for a reason. They go to work. They do their 9 to 5. How do they do their job? What evidence do they look at? And I gave it at the very beginning in that slide where we talked about the criteria of authenticity. If a source is earlier, it is definitely more plausible. If a source has multiple independent sources, yes, it is. According to who? Who says it's not?
So you think just because something, the dates correlate, that means it's true?
It helps. I didn't say it's true. You said that. I said that.
Okay.
So I said very clearly, and you can rewind the tape later on. I said very clearly that if a source is earlier on, it is more plausible to be right.
But it doesn't mean it's
so
evidence.
now. But here's the thing: you have multiple different lines of this historical criteria of authenticity and evidence. Not just if something's early. We don't just have things that are early. We also have multiple independent counts. People that never talked with each other. Josephus and Tacitus never had a conversation. So it makes it an independent account. Marabar Serapion never had a conversation with Josephus or Thales or Tacitus. So it makes it an independent account.
Right.
So not only earlier on, but now we have multiple independent accounts. And now we not only have that, but we have hostile attestation, where we have enemies talking about. See, if Tacitus really wanted, I'm sorry, if you want to go ahead.
So you have two independent accounts of people who talked about Jesus after he existed, right? After Christianity existed or began. And then you're admitting that they could possibly be interpolations. So how could you possibly gather any evidence from that?
I gave one interpolation. I gave one interpolation. One. That's it. Not you get it from a Jew, right?
So
you get it from a Jewish source.
So what?
I gave the interpolation. Like I said, I could have been dishonest and just put something completely opposite in the slides. But regarding the interpolation, when we're talking about Josephus, again, the people who do this for a living, they say it's partial interpolation. On both sides of the field, right and left, it's partial. And they can make a scholarly reconstruction based off of how Josephus said things, based off in his writings. If this doesn't match up, then it must be this. It must be the alternative, because these statements line up with how Josephus recorded history. These statements are outside of that.
Okay, so the job of the historian is to, yes, get the collection of documents and try to make a timeline of what happened, what occurred. That's still not evidence that Jesus existed. They're just collections of texts that give us some kind of timeline of things, and only two accounts. That's not really solid evidence. That's not sufficient evidence enough to prove that Jesus existed. It's not. According to the standards of you there?
Okay, something froze for a second. Okay, so I have given you names. I have given you dates.
And let's keep this pretty short, and we'll move to the next section.
All right, this will be the last thing I say, and then we can move into it. I've given you names. I've given you dates. I've given you places. I've given you people alive at the same time. I've followed the criteria of authenticity that historians actually look at to verify whether or not something is more plausible to be historical. That is what I've given in my opening statement. What have you given other than your opinion? What have you said? Have you given me one name that can corroborate what you're saying, that it's not really evidence and there are forgeries? Have you given one of those? No,
I don't need a name. I don't need a name. There's something called the standards of evidence which you should follow. That if you want to be rational in your beliefs, you need to follow the standards of evidence, which show that you need to be able to verify the facts that you're presenting and test them. And there's no way to test anything in those texts. Like I keep saying, there's no way to test or verify that these things in the text actually occurred. You can't do that with anything, including the Bible. The Bible is just words in a book. There's no way to verify that those things actually occurred. I don't need a name. I don't need to look at scholars who said it. I don't need to look at scientists who said it. I need to look at the standards of evidence.
Yeah, and with that, I guess we'll let you say one. I don't want to keep this going forever. I know each of you got another sentence or whatever. So, do you feel like you wrapped it up, or you need another sentence, each one of you, or where are we at here?
I'm good.
The only thing I will say is I feel like you're confusing scientific evidence, what you would actually use for science, with what historians use for history. And I feel like that is the worst idea that you could ever do when you're looking at historical authenticity. That's the last thing I'll say.
Okay. And with that, I can see we clearly can agree to disagree on that point. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's, I think, do you want to start this next part off with another point? I'm assuming you're taking the affirmative, John. So we'll just kind of make sure we lay out a little bit here on the topic. Specifically, was Jesus divine?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. The good stuff.
All right. So, yeah, I don't have slides for this or anything like that, but I may have slides later on. We'll see. So, in regarding my argument from the position of, regarding my argument from the position of was he divine, I primarily just want to focus on the resurrection, right? So, what are the facts? Again, and I'm going to absolutely pound and pound and pound scholarly consensus. What are the experts saying about these things? And I'm going to pound that into the ground as much as I possibly can tonight, because if we are going to make up an idea of saying, here's what my evidence is, and saying that what the experts use to verify something of historical authenticity is not evidence, I feel like that's incredibly weak. So regarding the resurrection, what are the facts and what are the best explanation of these facts? So I would say these facts, as we've already looked at, Jesus died by crucifixion. Bart Ehrman, Gerd Lubman, Crossan, look at modern scholars that are saying these things. So Jesus died by crucifixion. What does that say? Obviously, he existed. Second, obviously, he died. We even have a archaeological piece known as it's Johannan, and I could be getting that wrong. Fact check me. It's a piece of archaeological evidence known as Johannan. It's an ankle bone of a nail going through the bone, right? And that's a piece of archaeological evidence. So what does that give us? What does Johannan tell us? Johannan tells us that the historical account given in Scripture and given in the Bible and given in these extra biblical sources, it is consistent with what Roman crucifixion was back in that time. All right. So what are the facts? What are the best explanation of these facts? 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. 2, the Jerusalem factor, the empty tomb, right? This is another one of those facts. Well, how could you possibly know that the empty tomb? Okay, we'll get into that a little later. So I'm not going to throw you my cards, Mike. So the woman at the tomb.
Maybe we should let Mike respond to that right there, I guess.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, let's do that. Let's just do it free form. How about I give something?
If you want, yeah. I don't want to step in too much, but I think it'd be better we can move through your argument, let him respond at each point. I think that would work out pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, you're saying that because scholars say that he was crucified, that means he existed. That's ridiculous, honestly. But like many people were crucified. Crucifixions happened many times back then. It was the common way to execute people, unfortunately. And yes, I know you just and there's no way to tie those events to a particular person, especially Jesus. There's no way to do that. Now, empty tomb, of course, an empty tomb is evidence of an empty tomb. It's not evidence of Jesus being in there or resurrecting. Okay, that's all I have to say right now.
Okay, let me respond to something you just said. So crucifixion is a historical fact?
Yeah, crucifixion.
How do you know?
They happen all the time.
How do you know that?
We actually have
Testable evidence?
crosses. We actually have crosses that we actually have that dug from the ground, and we actually can see happened.
We have archaeological evidence of
Yeah,
like
just pieces of wood.
so pieces of wood are your
That-
standard of evidence that crucifixion existed.
Yeah, of course.
Based off what?
We also have stories of people. Right?
But I thought we already said stories
Thousands.
aren't evidence.
No, I'm talking about thousands of stories. Look, one story doesn't. You're just giving me one or two stories. You give me one story, right? The Bible story. Okay, I'm talking about. There's much more evidence. There's much more evidence of people actually talking about crucifixions, right? It's in different areas of literature. It's not just in religion. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you? There's much more evidence of crucifixions occurring.
Yeah, I think even Tacitus records crucifixion. I think people like Suetonius records crucifixion. I'm pretty sure Josephus records crucifixion. But these aren't valuable sources based off your view.
No. They're just okay. So I agree that they talk about crucifixions, but I'm saying the evidence that those crucifixions meant that Jesus was crucified, or the stories meant that Jesus was crucified, it's not there. That evidence is not there. But of course, people talking about it back then, this counted as evidence that crucifixions occurred. Now, in other words, because the claim that Jesus existed is an extraordinary claim. It's something that needs more evidence than just simply saying crucifixions happened.
That a person named Jesus existed is an extraordinary claim. It's not even a supernatural claim. No, it's saying someone was born and someone died. That's kind of by that case, I'm an extraordinary claim.
No. Saying that a specific person existed, right? That guy named Jesus Christ, saying that specific person. Of course, people exist. People are born. Just stories. But I'm just saying. There's no sufficient evidence that Jesus person actually existed specifically, as in the Bible. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, all right. So I want to reference that you've mentioned on multiple times that there's thousands of, and I want to get into the divine part, but I couldn't let this slide. You mentioned that there are thousands and thousands of different stories having to do with different characters, such as Aristotle and so on and so forth. Well, we have thousands upon thousands of New Testament manuscripts as well. So that's all I'm going to say regarding that. But so looking at Jesus' crucifixion, looking at the empty tomb, looking at something known as the so let's focus on the empty tomb here for just a second. Do you realize why scholars and historians recognize that the empty tomb is most likely a fact?
Because empty tombs exist. I don't know what you're trying to mean.
Well, specifically Jesus's.
Yeah, there's no evidence. There's no evidence of that. I don't know why people would assume that.
Okay, so here's why they would assume that, because then when you get into sources like Tacitus, when you get into hostile sources, when you get into literally the origin of Christianity, do you know the one thing that would have put Christianity on its head, and you and I wouldn't even be having this conversation? If someone produced the body of Jesus. So the early Christians, right? They're going around the world. They're preaching the gospel. They believe that Jesus is risen from the dead. And the early Christians are going around. They're being persecuted for their faith, even by a guy named Paul, who we're going to talk about here in just a second. They're being persecuted for their faith. So this is the origin of Christianity, by which Christus, right, what Tacitus says, where it originated with Christus, right, or Christ. So when you're looking at things like the empty tomb, and the reason it makes the most sense is because if the Romans in this time period and when the Jews were going around and they were causing all this trouble, right? They're making all of these claims. Jesus is alive, yada yada yada. We saw him, we've touched him, and they're making all of these claims. You know what the Romans could have done, or anyone who disagreed with these claims could have done, like the Jewish leaders who had Jesus crucified. They could have come up with the body, right? That would be a very evidential way to turn Christianity on its head. So the reason New Testament scholars and historians adhere to an empty tomb is because, one, Jesus died. Two, Jesus was definitely buried. Now, when he was buried, we've got to ask what happened with the body, because the body was never produced. The body was never given over. There was no opportunity for Christianity to get flipped on its head and it would have ended before it had even begun with that one thing.
Wait, so I'm trying to understand. So you're assuming that Jesus existed, then you're assuming that he was born, then you're assuming that he died, then you're assuming that he was in that tomb, and then you're assuming that he resurrected. That's a lot of assumptions with no evidence to back those up.
I've given evidence after evidence after evidence after evidence tonight.
Let's just say that Jesus did exist. All right. What's the evidence that Jesus was in that tomb?
Okay.
Did you hear me?
No, you cut off. Say that one more time.
Well, here, when we are we're getting back into like the historicity of this whole thing, and
Yeah,
we are at about like an hour now. So if we want to start like either moving on and start reaching an end at some point, I think what we would like to do too is, if you guys are free, I don't know, we can keep the conversation going in the Discord. We may have an after party on this show. I think we're working that out. So whatever, this conversation isn't going to end, as soon as this debate's over. So
real quick, I
let's
just
kind of
wanted
move
to
forward.
say, what do you believe that
You just cut out at the
You
very
cut out,
end,
my friend.
but I think you're back.
Sorry, man.
So
say that again.
Do you believe that Jesus was a supernatural, and what's your definition of supernatural?
So obviously, I believe that Jesus was divine. I believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and I believe he did supernatural acts. But I don't just believe blindly. I look at the evidence for these things. So in talking about the resurrection, and like, I do not want to force you into having to have this conversation with me based off of you making a presupposition that Jesus existed. We can do that if you want to, but I want to make that clear. I don't want to force you into a presupposition.
Okay, let's go ahead and let's do it.
You want to just
Double.
Yeah, I guess what you're saying, John. Yeah, you just want to. Moving forward, we just want to assume that Jesus did exist for this part, because if he didn't exist, then he definitely wasn't divine. So
yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay, so I believe, based off the evidence that we have drilled into the ground, that Jesus did exist. So based off this presupposition, talking about the empty tomb, again, you get into New Testament accounts, you get into things such as independent accounts later on that are mentioned, talking about, and earlier accounts talking about the disciples, right? So the empty tomb, okay, we can go a little further than that. We don't have to stay there, because none of these things that I've said, okay, his death, him being in a tomb, whether there were women at the tomb, whether his disciples believed they saw him, any of these things, none of them are supernatural claims in nature. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're not supernatural claims. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at it also from critical scholarship. And in regards to this presupposition that, okay, let's say Jesus existed, okay? It's recorded in the Gospels in multiple sources that are independent. All right. So this goes into New Testament reliability, so to speak. Now, in talking about the empty tomb, let's go beyond that. Let's look at something known as the Criterion of Embarrassment. Okay, are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Criterion of Embarrassment. This is what historical scholars look at and historians look at to, again, tell whether or not something is historical. So when something has an embarrassing detail in it, okay, it is more plausible to be true. Because, oh, someone muted me. Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
I saw it like you are muted by host. I'm like, oh no, what have I said? All right, but in regards to the women at the tomb, so you're familiar that within biblical culture or biblical times that women, their testimonies were worthless, or are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so they were, and you can look at things like what Paul says, where he says, "I do not allow a woman authority over a man. I do not allow a woman to teach." Right? That's a very popular atheist passage that they like to use for misogynistic ideology. But you can look at these things, and this is something that satisfies the criteria of embarrassment. Because the women are the very first people to discover the empty tomb. Why is that so important? Here's why. Because if you are making up a story, if you're saying, okay, now I'll go on your presupposition. Jesus didn't exist, right? Let's go there for a second. Jesus didn't exist. All of this is made up. Now we have a problem. You want to know why? Because the Messiah, right, from the Old Testament is supposed to be prophesied. The Messiah is supposed to be the one that comes and delivers the Jewish people from the Romans. Okay, are you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's look at this. If the Messiah is coming to deliver the people from the Romans, then it would be a really, really, really bad idea to come up with or fabricate a Messiah, right, that is killed by your enemies. Yeah, that's going to get a lot of attention, because the prophecies having to do with the Messiah and that everyone believed throughout all of Jewish history completely had to do with a Messiah is going to come and save us from the Romans. We're not going to be thrown down in the streets anymore. We're not going to be taxed like crazy.
All right, so I'm trying to understand this. So your evidence that Jesus resurrected is that it was an embarrassing story.
Okay,
for
so
the women.
No, it's not embarrassing.
Not to butt in too much, but let's wrap this thing up in about 5 minutes here and get to Q&A. So
okay, yeah.
Shoot. Okay, well,
if
there's
we're
so
good
much
with that.
more.
Yeah. So we can probably
We may have to have a part 2, Mike.
Exactly. We're considering hosting an after show on my channel. There's a show going on here at 9. It's the only reason we don't want to keep it going, so we got to prepare for that. They're going to have the co-host on that show is maybe a future co-host for the channel, so be sure to check that out. But yeah, so let's do a couple. Maybe how do we want to split this last bit of time up? I guess do we want to just
wrap up?
Yeah, give each of you a couple minutes and just wrap up. So
okay, so what I'll do is I will just give why I believe Jesus is divine based off the resurrection. I will give every point that I can think of, and then I'll let you respond to those points, and that'll be the end of it. I mean, I wanted to get much more into the divinity, but we spent too much time on the existence. So I would love to talk to you again, Mike. And it doesn't have to be on camera. You and I could just have a conversation. Like I said, I make war against arguments, not people. So I hope that we can develop a friendship like I have with many atheists on TikTok. So in regards to the resurrection, here's why I believe it. So I believe Jesus existed. I believe he was crucified. If he died, he was buried. If he was buried, and the Christian movement would never have even got off the ground if they would have just produced Jesus' body. That's all they would have had to do. Christianity exists today because that did not happen. Okay? So he was buried. His body was found by women. Women in that culture, their testimony was worthless. This is an embarrassing detail to add within the story. It's also a very embarrassing detail to say that your Messiah that was told for thousands of years was going to come and destroy the Romans was actually killed by them and crucified by them. That's not the superhero story we want to develop if we're going to make up something that's fabricated. All right, so in regards to the crucifixion, in regards to the women at the tomb, also the appearances to the disciples. The appearances to disciples is one of the most attested facts because scholars all the way to the left, all the way to the right. They believe, now this is not a supernatural claim, they believe that they saw Jesus. I'm not saying that they saw Jesus. The scholarly consensus is that the disciples believed that they saw Jesus, all right? And they know that because they later on died for it. So these appearances to the disciples and then to Paul specifically. Paul was appeared to. Why is that important? Because then we get again into enemy attestation. Not a single person alive says Paul didn't exist. None that I can even think of. Not a single person alive says Paul didn't exist. And you have multiple accounts. And I think you even said where you talked about you were actually giving scholarly consensus earlier on. And you said that certain books are accepted and certain books aren't. You made a differentiation in your statement. And like I said, we can rewind it and look at it later. But you made a differentiation where you said some books are accepted by scholars and some books aren't. So in regards to Paul, when you're looking at him, you can say, okay, he was an enemy of the faith. He was persecuting Christians, and he completely turned his life around because, again, based off his accounts, we see where he believed he saw Jesus. 1 Corinthians 15:38 would actually be a good one. And this is the last thing that I'm going to say. I'm going to open this really quick. So this is 1 Corinthians 15:3-8. Most New Testament scholars believe this to be one of the earliest references regarding the New Testament. Okay, this is what's known as a creed, is what they look at it as. So when you look at what Paul is saying here, for I deliver to you as of importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins. Okay, and this is where the creed starts. So for I delivered to you as of importance what I also received. There's a part in Galatians where Paul actually goes and he spends 15 days with Peter. He mentions Peter in this. We know Peter's a real person. We know Paul's a real person. We know Peter's a real person. Or Cephas, mentioned right there. We also know that James is a real person, the brother of Jesus, as Josephus mentions. So we see James there. All right. And I want to address that anyway. All right, I'm going to go on. So for I delivered you as of importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. This is where the creed starts. And that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born. So when you are
let's wrap this up in like 1 minute 30 seconds or so.
Okay. All right. So what you're looking at is you're looking at these different things regarding oh, there we go. I couldn't see myself. What you're looking at is these things regarding the resurrection and what is known as facts under scholarly historians and research. Crucified, empty tomb, or crucifixion, Christianity would have been put on its head. The women at the tomb is an embarrassing detail that would not have been added as a fabrication. First off, your Messiah wouldn't have been crucified. The appearances of the disciples, they believed it so much that they went to death. Paul talks about it over and over and over again, and he never is talking about a mythical man in the sky. He is consistently talking about a bodily resurrected Jesus. This is enemy attestation that gives us more than enough reason to historically believe that he converted to Christianity, and he talked about his persecution of the Christians. And like I said, no one doubts Paul exists, but he talks about his persecution of the Christians, and he even recites this creed in 1 Corinthians, where he most likely or possibly got it from his meeting with Peter in Galatians. So
all right. Yeah. So with that,
let him talk the rest of the time. I have nothing else to say.
Mike, you'll wrap it up, and then we'll go to a pretty quick Q&A. I don't know if we're gonna have too much time for much, but let's let you wrap it up.
All right. Thanks. So, can you guys hear me?
Yeah. You're good.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay. So John says if he died, he was buried. Okay. How do you know that? What if he was thrown off a cliff? Right. We don't know. Then he says body was found by women. Okay, where's the DNA evidence of that? Can you verify that these women actually saw the body? Disciples could be lying. Could they not be lying? And how do you know that they were willing to die for it? You're taking the Bible's word for it. You're taking the Scripture's word for it, and so are the scholars. Okay. Then you say Christ died for our sins that He created for us, right? He knowingly knew that we would sin, so He died so we can come back, and then I don't know what. We're still sinners in the end, so it doesn't really make sense. And so at the end of the day, there's really no way to objectively verify that the stories in the book actually occurred. And until then, they should not be believed. Right? And that's all I have.
Awesome. So I think Mike's gonna come in for the Q&A. Yeah, here we go. This long hair weird guy, so I'll throw it over to him.
The guy that was being debated about the whole entire time, and I'm right here the whole time, but whatever. So
yeah, with that, I'm gonna turn my camera off and step away. But this was a pretty awesome debate. I hope I did all right moderating, didn't step in too much or not step in enough. So hope everybody enjoyed watching the debate, and let's get into the Q&A.
yeah, we thank you, Spartan. By the way, everyone can go check out his channel, Spartan Theology. If you could please subscribe, especially if you're a Christian or a theist. He's got really good content there for you. We try to all work together, so go do that if you can. But yeah, we have some questions. I don't know if the producers are ready. If they are, I guess we could throw up the first one. But before that, in case he's got it already, never mind. We're good to go. So let's just go ahead and get that question out. So it's the wreck of the Titan or futility. It was written years before Titanic, and the story in the book was very similar to the Titanic accident. Does this mean that the news about Titanic was false? That's for Mike, and that's from Get Ogat.
The news about Titanic was false. No, I mean we know that Titanic actually occurred. We can actually go under the sea and see the remnants of the Titanic ship. That's how we can verify that these things actually occurred, right? So I'm not really familiar with the wreck of the Titan, but we know that the Titanic event actually occurred because we have verifiable evidence of it. I mean, yeah, that's all I have. Hope that answers the question.
That's sufficient for me. Producers, if you got another one, if not, I'm gonna go ahead and just for coming out tonight because it's all and nope. Sorry, I had a little connection error. For John, do you have any independent attestation for the persecution and martyrdom? Martyrdom? I can't say that word very well. Of the disciples or first century apostles?
Yes, actually we do. We have, there's some references to James and his martyrdom being referenced not only in Josephus, but also, let's see, in Clement of Rome or Clement of Alexandria. It's one of the two. I'd have to check on exactly the source, but I know we do have independent attestation for the martyrdom of James. I think it's Clement of Alexandria. Don't quote me. I'm not quoting myself, but Josephus actually mentions that as well, where James was persecuted and killed for his faith.
Awesome. Thank you, John, for answering that. We can just go on to the next question if you got it queued up there, sir. For Mike, can you provide attestation that the other supposed dying and rising gods were born of virgins?
Yeah, no, there's no solid evidence that they were born of virgins, but that doesn't really matter. All right, what matters is that there are other mythical stories that are even if there's one similarity between these stories, it would still be a reason to believe that the story of Jesus could have been non-original. It could have been influenced by these other mythical stories. So yes, I mean, we're not saying every detail is consistent with the Jesus story of of these other mythical gods, but even if one similarity exists, it should be reason, just a reason to believe that the Jesus story is not authentic.
Mike, can I just ask you a question really quick? And I'm not even going to respond to your response.
Sure,
but,
John, but this is not school, so you don't have to raise your hand.
Okay, well, I was letting people know that I had a question.
I'm not a teacher.
Just really quick, you said that you do not believe that Jesus ever existed, right? But you also said you're not a mythicist. How? Because that's the default position. To believe that Jesus is not historical is to believe that he is a myth. Therefore,
no, it's not. It's not. I'm not convinced that Jesus existed. There's no sufficient evidence to believe that a Jesus existed. There's none. I'm not a mythicist. I don't believe that the story is a myth completely. It could be, though. I'm not entirely sure. But my position is that I'm not convinced that the Jesus story is completely true or true at all.
Okay. Oh, for John. In your understanding, what definition of Messiah? Oh, sorry.
My bad, John. I thought my mic was unmuted. It was a rookie mistake.
No, you're
for John. In your understanding, what definition of Messiah did first century Jews use?
In my understanding, if I understand what the question is, I'm thinking it is the reference to him being the anointed one, the Hamashiach, right? That's what Messiah meant, the one who is going to deliver the people. I think that's what the question means. In my understanding, what definition of Messiah did first century Jews? First century. Okay, wait. Hold up. So we're not talking in Old Testament. We're talking Messiah having to do with the first century Jews. Okay. Yeah, I mean, even then, you're still looking at the anointed one, the deliverer. I may just be completely misunderstanding what he's trying to say. Divine, you can clarify for me maybe right now. I can answer a little better. If not, I think I know you from Discord.
That's Nathaniel. He's everyone actually pause on the questions. Every person, atheist, Christian, I always feel like I'm giving a cheat away. If you go right now and subscribe to Divine Disbelief, it will benefit you in knowledge. I promise you, because that is a channel that is a hidden gem that I almost don't want to tell people about, but for like my own, education. But no, it's a really good resource. So everybody go do that. But anyway, from Ethos, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I said that wrong. Why would an all-loving, all-powerful God send people to hell? Why would a finite being only capable of so much sinning be warranted to infinite punishment?
Okay, so my answer to that has to do with I do not believe God sends anyone to hell. In the same way that a judge that proceeds over a trial, right? If you have a prisoner, that judge enacts judgment based off the prisoner's deeds. So what the prisoner has done is actually going to determine the sentence given by the judge, depending on what they've done. And so when we're looking at God, I look at this from a completely different perspective. If we have the truth right in front of us, if we have this recognition that Jesus was a real person, if we have this evidence that corroborates his resurrection and the prophecy that said he would resurrect, when this temple is destroyed, I will rebuild it in 3 days. We have this truth. You hear it preached literally all over the world. It's not just in Western civilization. The message of Jesus is being preached all over the world. I'm a part of the Assemblies of God. We are the biggest missionary-based church out of every denomination. And so when we're talking about why would an all-loving, powerful God send people to hell, it's not that's a moral question in and of itself. What you're really questioning is, if God is good, why would he do this, right? And so when we're looking at the example I gave, someone who does something wrong, against the law. They make their decision. They like you have people right now that are breaking the law all over Minneapolis, and I understand the reason that it's a really hurtful thing that happened. I don't want to put that in any bad light, but you have people breaking the law, and when you break the law, there is punishment for crime. So if you're standing in front of a judge, who sends you to jail? The judge who says, because of what you've done, you're going to be spending life in prison? Or is it your own actions that have led you to that point?
All right, this is from Landon Tucker, which, by the way, speaking of debates, you can go watch our debate on our channel. It's one of the first videos we have. For Mike, considering scholarly atheists believe Jesus existed, just that he wasn't divine, what evidence would be sufficient for you to prove he existed?
Sure. So, as I would say, with like George Washington and all these other historical figures, we actually have sculptures of them, portraits, birth certificates, documents from when they went to schools, or we have George Washington's skeleton. We have DNA evidence, and any DNA evidence would be sufficient. More writings of him from different independent sources, right? And if you put all these together, then we can kind of formulate some kind of evidence, right? But right now there's not sufficient enough evidence. Hope that answered it.
And for John, can you show where Josephus says James was martyred for his faith?
If you give me a second, go to the next question. I'm going to have to go to my Google because I don't have it written down.
You get one chance and then we move on, buddy. I'm sorry. We got a show to run here in the future, so no, I'm sorry, but no, you don't get a second chance. Anyway, next question, sir. For Mike, can you provide attestation that other supposed dying and rising gods were born of virgins?
I answered this one already.
Oh, you did? Yeah, you did. You did. I felt like I said that twice. Producers, can you pop up another one, please? If that's all, then that might be it. But I think there could be one. If that is it, we can go back to that question with John. A reminder: we do have a show with a guest that is an atheist at 9:00, and so if you want to stay tuned for that, you can. If we push it back, it'll probably be like 9:10. But it should be around 9:00. We just want to give a heads up that if we're not on right at 9, usually about 9:05, 9:10, and if that's the case in the future, sometimes it's because we're working out some connection issues. So we apologize about that. But if that's all for us, if I can get some word from a producer or something, maybe if that's it, we can move on to the end of this. There's only one question. There are only questions left for. So throw one more question up, and then we're gonna end this stream. Yeah, John, do you want to answer your question that you had?
I wanted to answer his question. Yeah, so it's actually just below where the Josephus quote that I gave having to do with James, the one that's uncontested among scholars, where it talks about brought them before the brother of Jesus who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others, when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law. So basically being a Christian is breaking the law, and that's why Paul persecuted them. He delivered them to be stoned. But as those who seemed the most equitable citizens and such, as they were most uneasy at breach of the laws. So I think there's actually another source as well, but I think that talks about James stoning in Josephus. It's Antiquities, book 20, chapter 9.
Okay. Yeah, divine disbelief actually was, I think he posted that in the comment as well. But yeah, we want to thank you guys. I thought that was a pretty good conversation there to be had. Is there any final remarks that you guys want to do? Plug your channel, something that's not related necessarily to the debate, but if you want to plug maybe your TikTok or your YouTube or your MySpace or whatever you have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead. You first, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just
start
want
with
to
the
thank you guys for just want to thank you guys for letting me on here. I had a nice discussion with you guys, with John. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, you guys, if you want more from me, you can look at my TikTok. It's just my name, Mike Burgundy. On TikTok, I have a bunch of videos on there you guys can watch. And that's it. Thank you for having me.
All right. Yeah, so I'm just going to say you can do the same thing with me. I'm on TikTok. You can follow me at Bought by Blood 316. I'm on TikTok. I do this type of content, make a lot of friends, make a lot of enemies. No, I don't make nearly, I make them as enemies and then they become my friends. But yeah, and if you're in Florida, if you're in Naples, Florida specifically, then, you know, and you're watching this, come to my church. We're actually, COVID-19 is chilling out down here and we're opened up. So come say, hey, Golden Gate Assembly of God.
Well, thank you guys again so much. And if you guys don't already know, truth has nothing to fear from investigation. So come on to the round table, put that to the test. If you believe something is true, we want to test it. We're going to push back. Even if you're an atheist, we'll push back. We want to see how you got to where you got. And with that said, if the producer has it queued up for me, hit that outro music, and we love you all. Thank you very much.